Welcome back, everyone. Week 3 of the NFL season here, and fantasy football owners wondering when some star players are going to produce. So we have Russ Bliss from fantasyfootballstarters.com joining us this morning. Patience is the key, because you will have some guys who are doing poorly who will eventually do well, but then there's some guys who are doing well that'll eventually also have some bad days. So it all balances out.
Yeah, it's called the fantasy football law of averages. And what the fantasy football law of averages dictates is that the stats will even out at the end of the season for players. Stud players will have stud numbers. Mediocre players are going to have mediocre numbers. A guy like Andre Johnson of the Houston Texans in week 1 laid a big egg, only had like 4 receptions for 35 yards. In week 2, he blows up for over 10 catches for 140 yards and 2 touchdowns.
He'd be good to have on your team that week.
Exactly. He's a stud player.
Okay.
Now, in the reverse, a mediocre player is like Cowboys wide receiver Patrick Crayton. Patrick Crayton had a really good game in week number 1 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but then in week 2, he only had 1 reception in that game for only like 8 yards. He's a mediocre guy that, on average, is going to finish the season with about 700 yards and maybe 5 touchdowns. So he got like 20% of his total yardage in week number 1
already
alone.
Okay.
So you have to expect lower numbers coming forward.
All right. What about someone like Matt Forte with the Chicago Bears?
Matt Forte with the Bears has had 2 bad games in a row so far. But Matt Forte, we saw last year, was an incredible talent for the Chicago Bears. He really is a very good football player, very good fantasy player. So it stands to reason that because he had these low games, he has to have games that are above his average going forward for him to even out by the end of the year. And he makes an excellent play, especially this week against the Seattle Seahawks.
Now, what about a couple of guys who have been doing well? Is there a chance that they'll continue their success? Mario Manningham, and what about Mike Sims-Walker?
Well, those are 2 guys that, in my opinion, have a lot of opportunity going forward. When talent meets opportunity, that's what makes luck in fantasy football. And Mike Sims-Walker steps into a situation there in Jacksonville where they don't have any true number 1s. Mario Manningham, same situation with the New York Giants, no true number 1s. These are guys that, going forward, have an excellent opportunity to put up good, steady, consistent fantasy points with a high amount of upside.
Okay. As we always do, we always talk about our Cardinals, of course. They have a primetime national game tonight at home against Peyton Manning and the Colts. Who should we be looking out for? Let's start with Beannie Wells.
Well, of course, the Arizona Cardinals, their rushing attack has not gotten going so far in 2 games in the regular season, but they get a matchup against Indianapolis, and they've got the 30th ranked run defense in the NFL. If Beannie Wells can hold on to the football, and all reports were that he was going through Cardinals training facility this week, holding on to the football.
I heard about this. I didn't know that they do this with the rookies.
Oh, yeah. They go ahead and they make them hold the football sometimes if they're having any type of problems holding on to it during the games, and it gets them more comfortable to understand that you got to carry it. You got to carry it. You can't let go of it. And so Beannie Wells has an excellent opportunity this week with his explosive running style to get into the Indianapolis Colts defense, since their defense is not very good against the run. They're 30th against the run so far.
And apparently I've heard that if one of the other players tries to knock it out, which they do, they try to knock it out of their arms, they have to pay $200. Beannie Wells has to pay $200. It goes into a pot which goes into charity later on at the year. Did you hear about this one?
No, I haven't heard about this, but I tell you what, that makes a whole lot of sense.
I think that's really cool. All right, let's talk about protecting Kurt Warner. Defensive line, they've got to protect them.
Yeah, Kurt Warner in the first game against San Francisco got pressured an awful lot. But then last week against Jacksonville, he didn't get any pressure. He had those 15 straight completions in that game. He had really good numbers. That's the key for Kurt Warner. He's a rhythm passer. He needs to have the protection in order for him to have success throwing the football. And also he has to throw the football downfield more often. Get Larry Fitzgerald more involved in the downfield passes. Anquan Boldin last week had 8 receptions, but only 78 yards. That's less than 10 yards in reception. That's not what we typically expect from a guy like Anquan Boldin.
And talking about just watching Kurt Warner, the question is, of course, can the Cards block Dwight Freeney? That's going to be the guy they're watching.
Yeah, definitely. The Cardinals' offensive line has got their hands full making sure that Dwight Freeney and the rest of the Indianapolis Colts defense, which is a very fast defense, they're predicated on speed, not size. They have to make sure that they keep them off of Kurt Warner this week.
All right, and then putting pressure on Peyton Manning. That's the other side of it.
Yes, the Arizona Cardinals are second overall in the NFL. They've accumulated 8 sacks through 2 games so far. They've got 7 players with at least half a sack, but they have to get pressure on Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning, just like Kurt Warner, is another one of these rhythm passers. You let him sit back there and pick you apart, you will get picked apart. You have to get to him, knock him down, get him frustrated, get him flustered. And the Colts, conversely, they're one of those teams that very rarely gives up a sack. Only 2 sacks in 2 games so far. That's pretty much par for the course for them.
All right. Well, we're looking forward to this matchup for sure. And hey, didn't know if you guys knew this, but Russ has a radio show 3 times a week that airs on 1060.
Yes, I actually do. It's called The Red Zone, fantasy football and NFL talk, every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights from 6 to 7 p.m. So definitely tune us in. You got fantasy football questions? I take calls all hour.
Which also streams on the fantasyfootballstarters.com website.
Yes, exactly. We stream it live at fantasyfootballstarters.com, so that way if your AM reception isn't all that good or you're stuck in a building and you have to work in those times, you can always go to our media page and you can pull it up right there and listen to it live as it's happening through the internet.
And key is free advice, folks, free advice. Russ, thank you so much for joining us this morning.